Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am at AK Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 186. In this episode, we were given a choice. You, me, all of us. Get in or get out. And since we don't get out much, I guess we have to get in. So we are going to do a little retrospective on the Nintendo 64, Project Reality, the Ultra 64, the Nintendo 64. And to help us in that retrospective, we are joined by the Remember 64 podcast. Dave and Jiggy are here to help us retrospect on the N64. Thank you for joining us.
Happy, very, very happy to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller, so to speak. So,
Oh my God!
Yes. Well, have you been on a side quest?
yes, I
I've been on a
have.
side
Yeah, a
quest.
couple.
So,
Dave's done like
Yeah,
three
yeah,
of
yeah.
them.
I couldn't help it. Mario Paint was not chosen yet. I had to do it. I had to.
It's true. When Geoff and I ran that poll and the N64 won, my favorite thing about that poll was the four of the major Nintendo consoles we hadn't covered yet. And like I got several replies going, "Where's the GameCube?" I was like, that was our first one. Go listen to it. That's why it's not included. But as soon as N64 won, I told Geoff there's no duo I could think of more deserving of joining us for this episode. The folks I first think of, and it's funny too, because Dave and I have talked about this before, and it's like, Matt, I like other stuff. I was like, I know, but this is your thing.
In the podcasting world, in the nerd world, whatever, it's good to have things, because then
It's
shit like
true.
this happens.
I love things and stuff.
Yes.
Things and stuff are just great.
can never have enough things.
Oh,
can
yeah.
never
Clearly,
have enough.
with the
Here.
shelf that's behind me and the things that we constantly talk about.
Oh, yeah, I got one too.
Yeah, shelves.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, I do love the Sonic Chaos, Sonic the Hedgehog poster you got behind you, Jiggy. Like that's
It's a good one. It's a
Yeah.
good one.
Dude.
We're not talking Sonic.
We're not Sonic didn't
Sonic.
join the Nintendo family quite
That's
yet
right.
at this point. But we are talking about the Nintendo 64, one of my favorite consoles. I think a favorite of everyone on the call. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of how we each discovered the console for the first time, some facts, of course. The Nintendo 64 was a 64-bit system, cartridge-based, first released in Japan in June of 1996, then in North America in September of 1996, and then the EU didn't get it till March of 1997, which is like, that's a huge gap. It's wild. And I know they always get huge gaps, but that one just feels bigger to me for some reason.
That was a period of time where the gap just was bigger. Like, it's closed up over the years. Like, not always, but when it was, here we are.
It's a stark difference, especially when you think about the Japan release. It's almost an entire year. But I would argue that I think 97 is when the 64 really, quote unquote, launched into,
100%.
there's just so many
Yeah.
classics.
I agree.
So I think they kind of got it at
the
the
year I
right,
think
at the
of.
right time, in a way.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. That launch window for the N64, small.
Yeah.
I believe there were
But mighty.
two games?
on
Two
day one.
games. Unless you're in Japan, then you got a nice third game, which is Shogi.
Yes.
Because everybody loves Shogi.
A licensed shogi game.
Wild.
Yeah. But it also, as far as context goes, something to remember. I mean, the N64 has a lot of highs and lows of its own mythology around it. And, this was like the first stumbling block or something of Nintendo's dominance. But you have to remember that the Nintendo 64 was spoken about at the same time in previews as the Sony PlayStation, as the Sega Saturn, which both were already out and had a good lead time on the release of N64. And so, as a bit of a stopgap, there was the Virtual Boy in 1995. And so
that lasted a while.
it lasted 1995. I think there was one 1996 release in North America, but that's about it, based off of my own Wikipedia researches here. And all these dates are pulled from Wikipedia as far as fact-checking goes. But
Yes.
that's another piece of kind of the temperature of how folks were feeling about what Nintendo was doing, how Nintendo was doing. There was enough time for people to get excited about the wham boom pow, in-your-faceness of what PlayStation was doing, of CD-ROM technology, which before that was just kind of a novelty, was feeling more like the new thing. And then Nintendo 64 came out with cartridges, with several improvements. You had 4 controller ports, beat that multi-tap required, but there was a lot of back and forth on that.
Yeah. It's one of those consoles that I'm very nostalgic for, and I guess we can start getting into our personal history. This was the first console that I wanted at launch. I didn't get it at launch. I got it shortly after. And so I've told this story in many places. If you've listened to our Mario 64 side quest episode that I did this story in great detail. I've done it on other podcasts about Mario 64, like Nostalgia Marcanum. So I'll keep the short version here. But I wanted the N64 for my bar mitzvah. It was that October, and I knew it was coming out in September. So it was like, as we were getting towards my bar mitzvah, I said, I don't want anything else, Mom and Dad. I want this console and this game. I didn't really know what pre-ordering was. I think Toys R Us was doing it at the time, but like it was not as ubiquitous as it is now. And so I couldn't get one. Sold out everywhere. And then I remember on a faithful Saturday, me and my dad, I was really bummed that we couldn't get me one. And I was like, can we just try? Let's just go to the Toys R Us, see if they got more in. And lo and behold, we went, and I talked to the guy behind because Toys R Us back then had like a little counter cubby where all the games were in the back, and they had to bring them out. So I went up to the guy and I asked him for it. And this guy could have been 50 or could have been 15. Like I was so young. Well, no, because I was 13. So he was probably in his 20s or in his 50s. No idea.
Yeah.
Like had a mustache. I remember him.
Yeah,
vividly.
he could grow facial hair. There you
Yeah,
go.
100%. He was quote unquote old. That's it.
So mature.
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 Very mature.
I was like, so do you have any N64s? And he's like, I don't know. Let me check the back. And he checked the back. And he's like, yeah, we have one. You want it? And Mario 64? I was like, yes. And so we bought it. And Jeff has reminded me now that I've told this story several times that while that was like a heroic moment for me, a joyous moment for me, it was probably some other kid's villain origin story that I took their pre-order somehow.
I cannot wait until the M. Night Shyamalan Unbreakable twist that comes where you meet that gamer. Or that anti-gamer now, I suppose.
Yeah, right.
I told that story in enough places that eventually it's going to come back to bite me in the ass. But that said, I loved this console from day one. It's funny. We talk a lot about magical experiences in games. I know both of you talk about it on your show a lot. There was something just so different about Mario 64 that felt so special in a way that some other games I still get these days. But like, it was just truly mind-blowing in a way that I can't explain now, right? You had to have experienced it. It was the first 3D platformer basically ever made, but it was Mario, a character that I had been a fan of since I was basically an infant. I remember bringing it home that afternoon and playing Mario 64, which what felt like 8 hours straight. I don't think it was, but it definitely felt like a long time of just absolutely diving into that world. I remember getting Pilot Wings shortly after. They were both worlds to explore, and I just spent so much time in them. And like this system to this day is one of my greatest heartbreaks of not having anymore. On the resale market, it's not awful for some of the consoles. Some of the basic consoles aren't terrible. Some of the cartridges actually aren't terrible. But then there are specific things that just due to rarity or limited printings are insanely expensive. It's one of those consoles that doesn't clearly fit into one of the retro buckets as far as resale goes. Like, it's kind of a little all over the place. Like, I know that the clearer consoles and certain controllers are much more expensive because they're rare, and then other stuff is less so. Rare, that'll come out later. But
on this console, no.
But this console to me is like the first console I remember knowing was coming out because I got the Super Nintendo late, I got the NES pretty late, I got the Genesis, I got the Square Genesis, so I got that pretty late, and then my Atari 2600 was a hand-me-down. The N64, while the Wii, I think, is the first one I stood in line for, the N64 was the first one I remember reading Nintendo Power, being aware of, and absolutely being over the moon that I got the new thing relatively soon to when it came out. That was the start of what then would become a habit for wanting to get consoles at launch. A thing that I don't do as much, but I'm getting back to depending on the financial place I'm in. But I loved doing that and knowing in that excitement. I just feel like there's nothing quite like that excitement for me because it was just a specific moment in time. Jeff, I don't actually think I know your N64 origin story. I can't recall if you had one when it came out. I know with some consoles, you didn't get them till much later.
And this would be one of them. That period of time when N64 was out, I was already enamored with the PS1. I do remember the Toys R Us kiosks with Mario 64 on it. The thank you for playing my game. Like that one.
That was good. That was good.
Thank you. Because that had been going on even after the N64 came out, because for a while that's really what was going on. And I was going to Toys R Us like maybe once a month for a T-Rex Gigapet and getting PS1 games instead. So I'm in the game aisle grabbing those little slips and hearing that. And so I played it occasionally. And most of my childhood of the moment experience with the Nintendo 64 was at friends' houses. Even though my house did not have an N64, the N64 was in my life. Several of my friends all had Nintendo 64s, so there were a lot of earlier games that I didn't spend a lot of time playing Mario 64, oddly enough. I didn't really get to play it until years later. I goofed around on it. Most of my time was playing Star Fox 64. That was probably the single-player game I played the most, and then other than that, it was multiplayer games, which the Nintendo 64 had in spades. And then there was a couple of other times where one of my friends, when he would sleep over the summer, he'd bring his N64 because I had the PS1. So if we wanted to rent something, we could do that. I had long weekends of living like the N64 was in my home kind of feeling. I was very aware of it. This was also definitely a time where, again, the PS1 was when I had a console concurrent with stuff coming out for it. And that was the last one I had for a while till after college. So being aware of what was coming out for PS1, what was coming out for Nintendo 64, very big deal for me. Having those moments of, is the PS1 version better? Is it not?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of thing. Oh, my gosh. No, the comparisons on there are constant and wild and unnecessary, but hilarious. Yeah. Honestly, for me, the N64, I know I've picked up in retro stores periodically. I think I had one around when I sold my collection back in college. But the N64 that is currently sitting in my collection is Sarah's. Now, Sarah is the one with the N64 history. So I'm going to bring our associate producer, my partner, Sarah Moonen, on to kind of give a little bit of, at least give a nice of the time origin story for our household.
Love it.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
Sarah.
Sorry,
Welcome.
Yeah, nice and crowded in the booth.
I mean, truly, we should have done a 5-person episode because I keep forgetting that you're the N64 sicko in your own home.
I sure am. If Geoff hasn't already said, I told them to mention that the N64 Collectathon was the best thing ever made for me.
Yes.
You're in good company here. But before we move on to our illustrious guests, by the way, Jiggylookback, Dave Petrangelo. This is Sarah Moonen,
hello.
Geoff's wife, and our associate producer. Sarah, give us a brief history of when you discovered the N64 and how early it came into your life and your family's life.
Yeah, so this doesn't paint me in a great light, but my younger brother said, I'm going to get the N64 for Hanukkah. Will you split it with me? And I was like, nah, it's not going to happen. And he's like, okay, well, will you get a second controller for Hanukkah so we can play together? And I said, no, I will never play with you.
Oh, damn.
And then he got it and a second controller. And I said, okay, I'll play if you'll watch me play.
Oh, my God.
I
Wow.
was not the greatest big sister,
Gutless.
for being honest.
Just gutless.
Yeah, I'm not really proud of that. Like I said, it doesn't paint me in the best light. But the N64 was the feature of my house growing up. My two cousins, one who is 1 year younger than me and one who's 3 years older. My brother's 3 years younger. The four of us would play all the multiplayer Mario games, right? We would play a lot of Mario Party, and back to not being great to my brother, we would tackle him when he was going to get a star, so he'd push no, I don't want it. And things like that. But again, it was very important. And then we did sometimes play nicely together, right? Sometimes we would play a one-player game where he'd watch me. That was pretty nice. Or
As long as you were playing, it was great.
yeah, I mean, to be fair, Geoff can attest that's kind of how we play video games too. But they're on guidebook for me, so at least we're collaboratively playing.
All right.
We really, really played a lot on the N64. And then when I went to college, everyone was playing Super Smash Brothers, which I had already gotten good at, beating my little brother on the hard computers, and break the targets.
Yes.
I was very good at that.
Mm-hmm.
But even still, to this day, when my cousins came over, they were like, so Mario Party, Mario Kart, are we going to do that? And yeah.
Yeah, Sarah is one of my favorite people, one of my closest friends, and one of the kindest people I've ever met, unless you play Mario Kart 64 with her. Then her competitive streak kicks in.
The closest I have ever come to asking for a divorce. I'm not saying we were dangerously close or anything, but I could say objectively that was the closest I've ever come.
So, yeah, I love Sarah and I love her love of the N64, but we don't we haven't played Mario Kart together in a while, so.
Yeah, and that's okay. And even to this day, again, I love the things that are spiritual successors to the N64 Collectathon. Donkey Kong 64 is so important to me.
Hell yeah.
I love when a trail of purple bananas leads you to the banana that you can get as Tiny Kong. Like, I don't know.
You're speaking Jiggy's language for sure. For
yes,
sure.
yes.
Do you remember what game your brother got for Hanukkah that y'all were supposed to play multiplayer?
No, I don't.
Ooh.
Fantastic.
Well, Sarah, thank you for sharing your history. We love having you here.
Very nice to meet you.
Glad
That was
I could
awesome.
pop in. Lovely to meet you.
Yes.
both. I'm going to give this back to Geoff.
I felt, if nothing else, Sarah needed a little bit of a segment, considering how important the N64 was for
Totally
her.
get it.
And I've got stories of things now that will paint her in a much better light as far as
Well, before we get to the 64 person, Dave, Jiggy, I mean, you built an entire YouTube channel around this console and collectathons to start, but you're much younger than us.
Mm-hmm.
What's your memory of the release of the N64 and like when did you start playing? Because it's obviously going to be a different timeline from the rest of us.
Yeah. So I'll just date myself. I was born in '94.
Ugh.
So I was right before that
for you.
PS1 release. You know, I was a little baby. I was a little youngin'. So let's fast forward. I got the N64 for Christmas in 1999. So I was going on 6 years old. I did not want the N64. I don't think I even knew about the N64. What I actually wanted was a Sega Genesis. And the reason why I wanted a Sega Genesis was because my friend at the time, his older sister had a Sega Genesis. So that's what I knew. I was like, I loved Sonic the Hedgehog, and I really wanted Sonic the Hedgehog. And I did not get Sonic the Hedgehog. I got a Nintendo 64. However, I got that N64. Actually, technically, I got the box for the N64. My dad thought that was, great to give me the empty box. And then tears were shed.
Oh, no.
Turns out Santa set it up in the other room, so it was all set
course.
to go. So then immediately just everything else just didn't matter at all. And I was in that room playing, and I got Donkey Kong 64, which changed my life. I'm so glad it was already mentioned by someone else other than me. I played the crap out of that game. I don't think I actually officially beat it until I was like 12 because I was too stupid to know how to get the Nintendo coin, which honestly, they're not very clear on that, especially for a little kid.
Yeah.
I probably should have had a strategy guide, but that's very frustrating. That's whatever. That's besides the point. I did beat it, and then I 101% it, and I have done that several times since. There's something about that game I go back to like every year or two, and I'm just like, oh yeah, this is nice. This is a vibe. It's so comfortable to me. But then you expand Donkey Kong 64, and I got a little game called Banjo-Kazooie, which I fell in love with even more.
Yeah.
That just led me segued into Rare, and Banjo-Tooie is my favorite game of all time, and I think that's all I need to be said. I mean, I grew up playing the N64 forever, and then I did get a GameCube as well. And so, like, my teenage years were formed by the GameCube. But, like, that adolescent phase, that was all Nintendo 64. And I have great memories of just, like, when I was a kid, it was the tail end, right? When I got my N64, it only had a few more years of life in it. So my dad and I would constantly find, like, shops closing out their inventory, getting rid of games. So my perspective, my memories are going to, like, Hollywood Videos. We had a local shop called Pick and Save. It was just a grocery store, but they had a rental store in there. And I remember that place closing out, and my dad took me there. I don't know what the prices were, but I remember that day getting like 20 to 30 games.
Wow.
Dear God.
Hell
And
yes.
as a kid,
Dear God.
I mean, my head exploded. There were so many things, and they were like weird games.
Yeah, that's like, I wanted to say Scrooge McDuck, diving into the coins.
Diving into the
money
gold.
Into the
bin?
money,
Yeah, yeah.
into his vault,
yeah.
just of
Oh yeah.
cartridges instead.
Oh yeah.
And I was going to say that, honestly, getting an N64 and, like, learning about it in 1999 is great because I was also looking up old Toys R Us flyers to get an idea of how these carts were priced.
Oh, yeah.
Because, again, they were all across the
Yeah.
board. And, we complain about how expensive some games are now. They were selling Doom 64 for $75 retail new, But this was covering costs. But looking at some of those latter day ones, because in particular, I wanted to see how much they were charging for Resident Evil 2.
Oh.
Couldn't find it.
Yeah.
But looking at it, a lot of those games suddenly got a lot less expensive. They were
Yes.
$20, $30, $40 games. So I can imagine when the inventory closeout was going on, like, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Just a few bangers I got. Tonic Trouble. That's when I got Star Fox 64, though I played it before that.
Mhm.
I got Charlie Blast, Robotron 64, Glover. I got like a bunch of just like games that I probably normally wouldn't have been interested in.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like a mascot platformer or, something like that. So I feel like it just broadened my horizons. And I just picked up a bunch of random games, and it was so cool. And I do have to say one thing because kiosks were mentioned.
Mhm.
I do remember Nintendo 64 kiosks, and I have a very particular memory about it because I was at Walmart and Majora's Mask was on the kiosk and some kid was playing it. And I remember playing Ocarina of Time and thinking it was really cool. And this kid was playing Majora's Mask. So keep in mind, I'm probably like 6 or 7. So I'm still like a little kid. And I'm looking up at this kiosk and he puts the Deku mask on
Oh no.
and he starts
Yeah.
like screaming. And I had just like little fact about me. I was absolutely petrified of ventriloquist dummies and the live action Pinocchio movie. So like that wooden face, right? I was terrified. I did not play
imagine.
Majora's Mask for like 10 years after that.
Yeah.
So that's it.
You
That's
know,
my little backstory.
Damn.
As an adult, having replayed Majora's or trying to replay Majora's
Mhm.
Mask not that long ago, those scenes are still creepy as
Oh,
hell.
yeah.
They're really,
Yeah.
Yeah, they did a
really
good job.
Yeah.
He screams.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, does
Terrifying.
he have to scream?
Does he have
No, it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary. Come on.
Sarah and I did a full playthrough of it. Like, neither of us had fully played through the game until the last couple of years,
Right.
and we did it. And, like, yeah, there was no screaming, but it was definitely like did they have to go this creepy?
Yeah, like did
I mean, yeah, they
So
did, but
creepy.
also.
but did they?
Well, last and definitely not least, the N64 man, Dave Petrangelo. I've been listening to your show since even before Jiggy came along and joined it. I got to guest on it in the early days, but I've been listening basically since you hit double digits, and you've grown a lot on the show, covered other stuff besides N64, but like this, clearly you decided to make this your whole public personality. So this console must be really important to you.
You know what? It's so weird because it seems like everyone has very interesting stories around how they acquired or have like these deep memories and connections to this console. And I do. A lot of it is very much around multiplayer experiences. Jiggy dated himself a little bit. I'm another 7 or 8 years older than that. So I was kind of at that perfect age where I was like, okay, all my friends are available at the same time. We're going to the same school. We're playing on the same hockey team and soccer teams. Like, we're sort of like this group of buddies that I had, like 5 or 6 of us, and then their older brothers who were also into games and also went to the same school, like very small town type stuff. We started always hanging out playing multiplayer games together, regardless of what it was. And then it morphed into, we actually switched over to Xbox after this and had like massive LAN parties with Halo and 4 TVs, and it was just ridiculous. But at this age, like, I have a story of how I acquired my Game Boy, like the original Game Boy and the Super Nintendo. I remember those. This was probably early to mid 97 when I got it, because I remember the games that I had first. It was GoldenEye. I'm pretty sure Wayne Gretzky's hockey, because Canada, so most likely that.
Yeah.
Of course.
Fair,
It's a
fair.
requirement.
It's
you
a good
can't
game,
buy
though.
the console without the hockey game.
You
in
can't.
Canada.
And the hockey
Yes.
games were just like, not even just my household, but like pretty much everybody's. I had every single, I guess you could call them EA NHL games from 1993, starting on the SNES until about 2012. Every single year I had a hockey game from that company. As crazy as that
Incredible.
sounds. Yeah. And when they used to be out on PC and not on the 64 or necessarily on Xbox and stuff. So it was like, I'm playing a hockey game on the keyboard. Anyways, N64. My story is basically, I have a bunch of games. Most of them are multiplayer. I'll play GoldenEye a million times over and over and over again. And then we'll take that to a buddy's place and we'll play multiplayer. And then I'll come home and I'll play Star Fox. And then eventually I got a hold of Mario 64. It wasn't one of those ones that I had from day one. You know, the whole thing of Jiggy, of you having all these experiences with these more like slightly more obscure titles, or at least ones that at the time were not the typical purchases, I guess. I never really got to those on this console until I was much older. And most of those, honestly, now, Buck Bumble's a perfect example, Matt.
Yeah,
Never played it up until a couple years ago when you came to the show and said, we got to play this game. This show, Remember 64 has allowed me to realize how much more robust the library is. And we're only, at this point, just over 60 episodes, 60 games in. And that's nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can talk about Mario Party. I played all of those. I owned, I think, the first one and the third one, maybe the 2 and 3. All these games have so many fond memories of playing with friends and my brother and my cousins. And a lot of those people that I grew up playing games with, I still play games with. It started with this console because for Super Nintendo, it's at your house and there's 2 of you. It's probably you and your sibling, maybe you and one of your parents, like something like that. But with this, it just brought people together. And that was what this console was to me for, I don't know, at least a decade, if not more. What happened to my original one? I have no idea. What happened to my cartridges? I have no idea. I reacquired stuff over the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years or something, and have sort of grown with how technology has with being able to play these games. But I come and I start a podcast like Remember 64 thinking, I got a gist of what this console is. And I realize I didn't. And I love that. Being able to talk about it and different experiences and stuff is great. So for me, my experience is multiplayer growing up, and that's it. And how I acquired it, I have no idea. I'm sure my birthday's in April. I assume I got it for my birthday in 97. That's my guess. They're not people that really keep track of those things. They think it's still weird that I play video games at this age. They don't, berate me for it, but they're like, oh, okay.
You're still doing that?
Joe, really? Can you give it up? I'm almost, I'm old enough. I can make my own decisions. Joe, come on, please. So I assume it was one of those things because the SNES was a gift. The Game Boy was a gift. The GBA was a gift. The Xbox was the first thing that I went out and purchased, quote unquote, myself. I'm sure it was allowance money or something. Who knows? But yeah, my long-winded way of saying multiplayer. I have no idea how I acquired it, but I still love it.
Yeah, I mean, multiplayer was the cornerstone of this console. To this day,
Definitely.
I lament the multiplayer era of the N64 and the GameCube. I think is unlike anything that came after the Wii and the Wii U, and even now the Switch. They do have multiplayer, and it's pretty easy to be multiplayer, and there's still a lot of multiplayer folks. But there's something about those 4 ports on the front of the console, just clear as day. There was no question that they expected you to play multiplayer, and it's the console I had the most couch co-op with, hands down, without a doubt, in my house. And that I bought 2 controllers out of the gate, and then all of my friends bought 2 controllers. So, if a bunch of us got together, we always had enough controllers.
And it's a funny thing to think about of nowadays, you run into, or I certainly run into a lot of there's not a ton of couch co-op. Where are those halcyon days of the party game and whatnot? And to really think about it, Matt, you kind of focus that for me where before the N64, there was definitely, there was competitive games, there's 2-player games, there's arcade experiences, but that idea of the couch co-op, the multiple controllers, the sort of bedlam chaos you want was basically N64, GameCube, Dreamcast, Xbox kind of thing.
Yep.
And then by the 360, we were all live. So it was long, but it wasn't. It was a lot, but it wasn't. And the N64, to throw some numbers here, a complete U.S. run of N64 games is only 296 cartridges, which is more than the Wii U, which had less than 200, but that had the digital marketplace to help it out. Yeah. So it's one of the smaller libraries for a quote-unquote successful home console. But a lot of them were bangers, and a lot of them had that strong multiplayer component that further boosted the nostalgia, the memories. I have a fairly decent N64 collection now, and I'm looking forward to grabbing more finds as I go about my life. But the ones that have come out the most and the most readily, definitely Mario Kart 64. I have friends that come over every week, we play board games, D&D, whatever. Sometimes, one of my friends will just go, "We play Mario Kart?" And she means Mario Kart 64. So we have other Mario Karts, but it's that
I would argue that you have better ones, most likely, but that's just me. That's just me.
No,
Yeah.
you're
Okay,
right. And that is the funny thing about the Nintendo 64. To me, with my sort of nostalgia and lack thereof mixed together, there's so many games that are so good while also being so bad at the same time. And there are so many games that are so bad while also being so good at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the library. It's funny, like, I remember when the 3D All-Stars pack came out, which undeniably was a bad package. Like, it just wasn't optimized how it should have been. But that said, it's the way I have to play Mario 64 right now. And a lot of people were like, oh, it doesn't hold up. The controls aren't as good, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. When I turned that thing on, it's like I was a 13-year-old boy again. And I'm not even a boy anymore. It's one of those things that, like, I don't know. I'll never be able to look at that game without nostalgia goggles. And I think it's just so tightly tied to that time period. It just means more than what it is. It's okay to have games like that. But I think for a lot of my friends also, this console generation was that, either the PlayStation or the N64. I think it's also timing, right? Mm-hmm. I was 13 when I got this console. I was a teenager. I was in high school. Like, that was like prime, come over after school or come over on the weekends and play games time. Yep. No job, no life. Like,
oh no, that was life. How dare you? That was life.
Yes,
that was exactly. Life now is no life. That was life.
Viva Nintendo.
Yeah.
But like, I think it's always going to be one of those consoles that I cherish so deeply because of that. There are pinnacle moments, like canon events, right? We want to talk about Enter the Spider-Verse. Canon events for me is the acquisition of the N64 and Super Mario 64, Mass Effect 2 specifically, the intro to that game, and like a few other things. But like, I had always liked Nintendo. You know, Chrono Trigger is my favorite game of all time, like the SNES. But I think this is when I started loving Nintendo, and it made me the obnoxious fan that I am now. Because, like, you look at this library, and yes, there are some truly terrible games on here. You know, like Duck Dodgers, which you guys have talked about.
No, we disagree on that. We disagree on that.
I disagree.
Yeah.
I like it. It's not the best, but it's great.
Yeah.
Shadows of the Empire is not a great game, but damn it, I love Star Wars.
Yes, I'm the same way. Yeah. I'm actually very surprised that I did not actually own this game. I know a friend did, and went over and we played the shit out of it all the time. It's like, oh, we got to play the Star Wars game. That is one of those games that now you play it and you're like, wow, this controls so awkwardly. It's a very early game, so you know there's a lot of reasons why that would be the case. And I just remember at the time we would play it over and over and over again. This is one of those friends' places that also had Rampage. So we would play probably the first couple of levels of Star Wars, and then there would be 4 or 5 of us over. And one of the sort of main multiplayer experiences that I will always remember is we would go to this friend's place once a year, and he lived on like a huge property, and we would go probably walk, you know, I guess for you three, it would be half a mile into the forest or a kilometer or
Thank
so.
you for converting it for us.
Yeah, I'm just trying. So, you know, we'd have to walk like 15 or 20. Yeah, we'd walk 15 or 20 minutes with like camping gear, and we'd go camping on his property. But we would show up the night before, we'd have some lunch, we'd hang out, we'd play outside and have some dinner and whatever. But we would play some games in between. So we started Rampage on one night in his room, and we told his parents, do not shut this off. We want to try and beat this game. And we did all 110 levels or whatever that one is. The next day we finished. So we did sort of like a half and half thing. How long that took us, I have no idea. I'm sure we were ready to put it down because it gets repetitive for that long or whatever. But that's...
I was going to say, like, that actually, that sounds ideal.
Yeah, it's you have to break it up, right? So, that's one of those things where it was a quote-unquote epic multiplayer experience, but it was broken up over the course of 2 days, and it was like, we have to finish. We're in the 80s, we're in the 90s, we got to finish this before parents come pick us up. I'm sure we were 12 years old, 11 years old, something like that, and it was like so cool that we did that, and I know that will never ever happen again. And this is the kind of console, everyone's sort of mentioned the couch co-op at this point, we could play it now, or we could play a version of that game now, whether it's a new one that comes out or play an emulation or whatever. You could play it online now, but it would not be the same experience.
It doesn't hit the same.
It's just not the same.
You need a little bit of gremlin energy to these things.
Yeah, no kidding.
The game room in my house growing up, it wasn't very big, but it could fit like 4, maybe 5 of us if we stack right. And like would bring in comic books, would do whatever, and we would hang out, and it would be either like couch co-op games or like a game that's mindless, but we're all hanging out talking the weird philosophical crap that you can only do when you're 15 and think you know everything. Passing the controller around and a little bit of just like, make fun of each other, throw things here. Like, I have been over here reading the entirety of this comic book run. What are we doing? Oh, cool, it's my turn, kind of thing. Like, that is that kind of couch co-op energy.
Yeah.
You know what I love about this? I feel like everyone has said a different multiplayer experience that they
Yes.
love.
Yeah.
You know, for me, the big ones were Super Smash Brothers and F-Zero.
Oh,
I played the crap out of both of those.
F-Zero for multiplayer.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Funny enough, I didn't even have it. I had Smash Bros. I didn't have
Yeah,
F-Zero.
same.
But my friend, shout out to Ben, if he's listening to this, we would go to his grandma's house. Because Ben was a PlayStation guy. He had a PS1. So all my experiences on PS1 are at Ben's house. But we would go to his grandma's house and play the N64 there so we could play F-Zero. And it was fun.
Because he had a cool grandma with an N64.
He had a cool grandma.
I
yeah.
can't even wrap my head around anyone older than me and my family owning a video game, never mind having a console in their house.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It just didn't think of that then.
I had older cousins, so that made
older
sense.
cousins, yeah.
That's your generation.
They're basically
Exactly.
kids, too.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I do want to bring up another thing. This certainly isn't universal, but this is a memory of mine. One of my friends who had an N64, whose house I spent a lot of time at because, near enough to my house, near enough to school, just hanging out. What are you doing? I'm over there kind of thing. Periodically check in with my mother. You dead? No? Cool.
Great.
One of those. This friend is somebody who, for as long as I have known him, obsessed with winning and obsessed with breaking things. And not in a competitive way necessarily, but I learned a lot about the Game Shark at his house on the PS1 and the N64.
Sure.
Why bother trying to unlock all of these things through beating it if I can just Game Shark it? So we would unlock everything in WWF Warzone and all just play through that a ton. He also would get a lot of cool import adjacent games. This is how I found out about Mischief Makers and a couple of other fun single player experiences. He was the one who told me all of the weird broken strategies to get the medals in Star Fox 64. But GoldenEye, we'd unlock everything and would just do the worst game modes ever. It was amazing. It was fantastic. And I remember also the first Mario Party. You could unlock the mini games by playing rounds of it. So one of the times I went over to his house to hang out, play games, whatever else. Also, this was somebody, do you remember the GX TV, the gamer TV that had the fold out flaps?
Mm-hmm.
He had one. That kind of motherfucker.
Hooked up.
Right there.
Fancy.
Hooked up.
Yeah. Oh,
Dang.
yeah. So we go and it's oh, cool, Mario Party. Because it had just come out. I didn't know a ton about it. It's have you just had it on? Yeah. On attract mode? No, I'm unlocking everything. How? Well, you unlock things by playing and beating the game. Enough rounds and everything else unlocks these. So I just put everything on 4 computer players on the highest AI, and I let them play and unlock all of the mini games. Do you want to play some of the mini games?
Thank you.
Okay.
Wow.
Kind of thing.
Wow.
Big brain. Big
Yeah.
brain.
Oh, yeah, no.
Big brain or cheater? I don't know. What is that?
Column A, column B. If you were to ask him, it's what you get in trouble for.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true, actually, especially as a kid.
Oh, very much so.
Before I move too far away from it, the thing about F-Zero X that also made it special to me, I got F-Zero around when it came out or after probably, because I got my Super Nintendo late also. And I loved F-Zero, but it was single player. Couldn't play with my friends. This was the first F-Zero game to have multiplayer. And so I was even more excited for it, and it became a mainstay multiplayer game in my home because it was F-Zero, but it's multiplayer. Let's go.
Yes. And it's so fast.
So fast. It's so hard to
fast.
control, but the controls aren't bad. It's just, it requires getting used to. But there's
Yeah.
just something special. And it's funny, you're right, Jiggy. So many games had multiplayer. And then I know someone who only played Star Fox multiplayer. To me, Star Fox is a single player game. I like the multiplayer, but it's a single player game. But to my friend, he played it until he unlocked the being able to play as the
On
individual
foot?
people on
Right.
foot.
Yeah.
And that's
It was
all
so
they did.
cool.
It was
It
cool.
wasn't good, but it was cool.
You could do it. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Falco's got a bazooka.
Right? That was the era of playground rumors,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Where nobody actually knew what was true or not. And then it'd be that one kid that'd be you can play as them on foot, And you'd be bullshit. That's not true. That's not true, man. You're messing with me. But you try what they suggest. And then they never knew how they actually unlocked it.
Yeah.
At least this is my experience.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Unless you were fortunate enough to find a strategy guide or something that would tell you this is a thing. I mean, I spent years looking for Toad in Smash Bros. Let's be honest.
Yeah, we all did. I think we all did.
Yeah. If not specifically that, like the general, we all looked for Toad in Smash Brothers.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
But like, it's funny to me, the pinnacle of multiplayer on this console, besides GoldenEye, which is like in another league, for me as a young wrestling fan, were both WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy.
No Mercy. No Mercy is amazing.
Like, first of all, for me, as someone who played with his wrestling figures, created a ramp out of paper to his TV so it looked like the Titantron, and played the music videos in the early days of the internet online so you could have the music of the wrestler as the figures came out. The fact that, especially WrestleMania 2000, which had the full intros, No Mercy had the truncated ones. You could pick a character, and like it was a slideshow of images. It wasn't a video, but there was a quote-unquote video on the Titantron. The wrestler would come out. There'd be pyro. It was awesome. And like I even loved WCW vs. NWO Revenge, which was the precursor to those games. There's something about that era of arcadey wrestling game that just doesn't exist anymore. The newer games can be a lot of fun, but they are definitely more strategic. That was, you did a grapple, and then like Smash Brothers, every direction did a different move. And the fun was figuring out what moves they gave the Rock besides the rock bottom and the people's elbow, right? Like what other random stuff does he have? How close is it to his actual kit from actual wrestling? Customizing wrestlers, making your own wrestlers. That was the pinnacle of multiplayer for me growing up because I was such a big wrestling fan still at the time. And I was like a giant Chris Jericho fan, and that was at the height of the Y2J stuff and like Break the Walls Down. I will specifically remember those theme songs so well.
Yes.
And like the N64, let's face it, did not have a great sound card. There's great music on the N64, but if it was meant to be real audio, it didn't always sound great, but then you found those games that had some incredible music. We have to talk about Rare. I think it's a requirement for this console, especially considering who's on the call. And it's funny because the go-to Rare games for me were not everyone else's. To me, the biggest two Rare games that I loved on the console, though I love all of them, is Killer Instinct Gold, because I loved Killer Instinct, and I played a lot of fighting games with friends, and Conker's Bad Fur Day, which was a favorite of a lot of people, but for me specifically, like, I felt like I was getting away with something playing that game.
Oh, totally.
I was 14 years old or 15 years old. And like to this day, and I've told this story several times, prompted, though I don't like to sing in public often unless it's at karaoke, I could sing the Great Mighty Pooh song from start to finish because I played that game so many times. It's funny, Jiggy, you said that you would play through Donkey Kong 64 many times and you continue to do it every so often. For me, until I got rid of my N64 and my 360, whether it was the original or the really poorly edited, muted Xbox one, I would play through that game over and over and over again. I just loved it. The humor was crass. It was probably not well written, but I didn't care. I loved it. It's funny because I always forget about certain Rare games that came out, but like Diddy Kong Racing, one of the best racing games ever made, especially the best single player mode racing games, hands down.
Which is so weird to say, but yes, is incredibly true.
Yeah, but like even the most popular ones, Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie and Donkey Kong 64, there's so many even outside that they're made, games that I didn't know that they had made in that era that they helped develop. Like, to me, there are a lot of developers who did some cool stuff on the N64. It was a rare console as far as I'm concerned because there was just so much for it.
Well, and I think also because Rare, when you think of them for N64, they put out some bangers in two of the big sort of banger genres for the N64.
Yeah.
They gave us first-person shooters. Holy shit, first-person shooters on a console. Like, there wasn't Halo yet, but we had GoldenEye and then Perfect Dark. And the 3D platformer, the Collectathon, all of those things. Like, I will support my partner's assertion about the Collectathon, even though I share none of the nostalgia or joy with it. But, oh no, I've gone on the record here being like, I know there's tons of games that I have so much nostalgia for that I will show to Sarah. She will try it, and she will be very honest with me about what, like, if she wants to keep playing, I know she's enjoying herself. She will not humor me. I completely understand how much she adores Donkey Kong 64. I could see why you would adore Donkey Kong 64. I do not have nostalgia for it, and I need it to go back to. I need it to enjoy it. Like, I enjoy watching her play it. It's like, put it in my hands, I get mad. But the fact of the matter is, they're still great.
Yeah.
And Rare put out some great stuff for what were the big genres on N64. Also, you had racing games. Also, you had sports games. But there weren't RPGs. There were puzzle games, but puzzle games typically don't get big stuff on there. But like, shooters and your grabbers, I guess. Shooters and looters.
Yeah, for me, I'm glad that we're talking about the rare stuff too, because Diddy Kong Racing to me is just incredible. And Matt, I'm glad you also mentioned, whether people heard it or you guys just saw me freak out, No Mercy could be the game that I have spent the most time in my entire life. Like to me that game is absolutely brilliant. Multiplayer it's a wrestling game, like you mentioned. You can do some really crazy cool things with it. No Mercy specifically was one of those ones when you were talking about, Geoff, I think you were mentioning about prices and stuff. I was so into wrestling right at that time, right in the middle of what is arguably the best wrestling's ever been with the Attitude Era. I need this game. I believe I own WCW, NWO, but never really watched it because I was too young, or, at the time I was like, well, I'm watching WWF. I'm not paying attention to who these wrestlers really are. And it was like, okay, I got to get this game. And then I realized that it's like, I think it was like $90 or something. And I made sure that I had $90 when that game hit the shelf. I needed it. I still have my original cartridge. That's one of the very few that I hung on to. And I just spent so much time playing that single player and multiplayer. And I find it personally, maybe I'm way off on this, but I find that game in particular mind-blowing that they had, not only could you go for each championship, but each one had branching paths and multiple branching paths, whether you won, lost, held the belt, didn't hold the belt. I'm sorry, but that is not something you ran into at this time. Like, especially in a sports game, I guess, if you want to call it that. And then Diddy Kong Racing, which I would have had a couple years prior to this, is to me a single player game. If I'm thinking about that, it is one of the coolest experiences you could play single player for any kind of racing game, no matter if it's a kart or if it's, an F1 car. It's just so cool that they came up with all these really great characters, brought in ones that we now know of that were brand new at the time, ones that they really should have kept going with, but were one and done there. But, there was a story to it. Did I know what it was at the time? No, I was just driving around and there was a racist elephant that was telling me, what I needed to do and give me balloons and stuff. But it was a fantastic game. And I love it to this day. And it's one of my favorite games of all time. That, GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie are like the three rare ones that will always stand out to me, specifically from that company.
You know what it is about Rare, though? And I have to say it, because the fact that they were building a Rare game universe.
Yeah.
And referencing different games in other games, like finding those little Easter eggs almost gives you a reason to pick up another Rare game that's a genre that maybe you're not even a fan of.
Yeah.
Or didn't have much experience with, how does Perfect Dark connect to Banjo? It's like, it's amazing. I love those little details. Oh, there's a Megan in the fridge. What's that logo? Oh, that's Perfect Dark. Oh my gosh, Perfect Dark and Banjo. Like, I lived for that. I still live for that. But, oh man. But I will stand behind, out of all the Rare games though, I still love Banjo-Tooie the most. I just replayed it. I just love it so much.
It's really good. I think what's interesting about collectathons specifically is that you can't do what someone else did. As much as I wanted to love Yooka-Laylee, and I don't think it's a bad game, because it was trying to pinpoint a very specific game that at the time arguably might have had some clunky controls but worked for that controller, trying to recreate that on a modern console just felt funky. It didn't play right. Impossible Lair, I think, plays much better going for the Donkey Kong Country style stuff. But then games that modernize it, like A Hat in Time, ones that do something different with that genre, but still it's a collectathon where you're moving through these 3D worlds. I think that's where we grow out of it, because like Mario 64, unless you're Nintendo, just like unless you're Rare, it's very hard to capture that lightning again. I think that Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts gets a lot of hate, and I don't think it's a great game. But I think the hate is overblown in a way that, like, Phantom Menace is a bad movie. It's not. It's not a great movie. But, like, people were so upset with what it became that they say it's worse than it is. And, again, I'm not claiming these things are great. But when you start with Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie and tease Banjo-3, it's like, I've never seen a fan base more devoted than the Banjo-Kazooie fans. We got Banjo-Kazooie and Smash. Like, it just is wild to me, the legs of that series that has only had technically 3 games. It's just kind of wild to me. And I think it speaks to the strength of the quality of that game. What's funny to me about this conversation is, like, and I did bring up Rare, and there's so much to talk about there, we're not even going to cover it all, is we have not even talked about really any, besides Mario 64, of the first-party Nintendo titles.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out, I don't think there's a console with a stronger third-party showing of quality stuff like the N64. PlayStation had some really high highs.
Yeah.
It also had some really low lows. But because I think the N64 also had such a small library, there are stinkers, tons of them, especially anything ported from the, like, that was a PlayStation, meant to be a PlayStation game ported to the N64.
Technically, Daikatana was released on the N64 first.
Technically.
Mega Man
but it
was
played
not.
much-
And I
Yeah,
will
no,
say
N64.
No, it was
no
not.
thank you to Mega Man.
Superman.
Superman.
And-
oh god.
40 Winks was never released on the N64, though it was made, and now we can
Now you
play
can
it,
play
which
it.
is really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
It is
That's
pretty
true, that's
cool.
true.
I love that kind of stuff.
But yeah, as far as like the numbers of, I mean, again, scattershot approach too. There was only 296 Western releases, so the highs look real good. And there were plenty of highs.
Yeah, I mean, like we mentioned Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time in passing. Ocarina of Time is not my favorite Zelda game of all time. It was for a long time, but I think I came back around to A Link to the Past and Link Between Worlds, its successor, being my favorites.
I love Link Between Worlds. Love that game. Yeah.
But I've also always had a softer spot for top-down 2D Zeldas. It's just my preference.
Me too.
I like
That's
Breath
me
of
with
the Wild. I
that's
like
me with
Tears of the
Mario
Kingdom.
games too. I prefer the 2D Mario games to all of the
Here,
3D
here.
ones. Despite how great those are as well.
Well, and that's something funny too. Like we were talking about the sort of lightning in a bottle of the Banjo games
Yeah.
and going back to it. N64 is, thinking about it now, a console of momentum where a lot of these things were of the time and of not quite the razor's edge that we usually think of, but were of moving forward. I have gone on record many times as one of the reasons I love the PS1 so much is because it felt like a wild new frontier. Anything was possible. Bad ideas, good ideas, let's just go. Throw it at the wall. And the Nintendo 64 has a ton of games where, like, yeah, I said what I said about Donkey Kong 64 and I stand by it. But that, again, is without the benefit of nostalgia. When it came out, it was so much. It had so many characters. It had so much to do. It had so many design ideas standing on its own shoulders from the previous Rare titles. A lot of what was going on with GoldenEye, is that how we should design first-person shooters nowadays? No. No, it is not.
No.
But did it get it out there? Was it enjoyable? Did we have a great time with it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Dave, you were saying about Mario Kart 64. We have better Mario Kart at home. But
I'm sorry. I need to clarify even further. Every single Mario Kart is better than that one. I'm sorry. It just
There you
is.
go.
Look, and I have nostalgia for that.
Picking fights.
Yeah,
Picking fights.
I have to stand by it. I just think it's true. I just don't think. I think it's by far the worst one.
Look, I will always say we need justice for Double Dash.
Oh,
That
Double
game
Dash is
got
so
too
good.
much
Here,
hate.
here.
Yeah, Double
Yeah,
Dash is great.
absolutely.
So good. Anyway,
And
sorry, I cut you off,
there-
Jeff.
no, that's totally fine because there it is. Like that feeling of, Mario Kart 64 was the 3D evolution on Super Mario Kart,
Oh, yeah.
which was such a big deal on the SNES. And so, like, it meant so much. Like, there are those highs, and it is so funny. I have talked a lot about games that, like, you look back at old games. Were they good or were they just important? The
Yeah.
N64 feels like it's got a lot of important to it. Should we be making games like Ocarina of Time anymore? No. Would we be making games like we are today without Ocarina of Time? I don't know.
No, or we would have gotten to it much later. I think
We'd have
Yeah.
gotten to it much
Yeah.
later. Exactly.
Yeah.
An interesting thing that I thought of too, while Matt and Dave were both talking, like Matt's like, oh, I prefer 2D Zelda, and Dave's like, oh, I prefer 2D Mario. You guys are old. Listen, you guys grew up with that's where your nostalgia.
Also, technically,
hits,
2D Mario
right?
Kart as well, because I think Super is better than
Yeah.
64.
Well, and a lot of the N64 games were evolutions on 2D franchises made 3D.
As they
Made
should have
3D.
been. As they should
Yeah.
have been, honestly.
Right.
Yeah.
And some did a better job of it than
Yes.
others. We all love Castlevania 64.
Sure.
Totally the best.
Great.
And I think, too, PlayStation got away with more because people had to make more franchises. So if they succeeded out the gate, they were designed with that in mind.
Siphon filter, baby.
Whereas, yeah,
Siphon
there you go.
filter.
Whereas N64 had a lot more legacy on its shoulders.
Yeah.
And if you lived through, being old, you're not wrong, Jiggy. Being, for a given value here, in this instance, yeah, we old. And we had the 2D games. And those 3D things out the gate were necessary. And for a while, they were the latest thing. And that burns just a little.
Well, it's the thing that I've now gotten into the habit of saying. It's a description of the show and of the library in general. Like, it is the 64, and on Remember 64, we play the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. Because that's a lot of what this is. And I also categorize this generation, this like being basically said the 64 and PS1 as awkward. It's an awkward generation because they had to figure a lot of shit out. Did they? Yeah, they did. Geoff, you did a great job of mentioning exactly why they had. Are all of them the greatest things of all time? No, but also necessary. Just like if you're sitting at around this age of when this came out, whether it's between 96 and about 2000 when they stopped making games for this, in that period, when all of us seem to have a decent amount of experience with this console, you're also an awkward individual at that age. Maybe more so the three of us than Jiggy. Jiggy probably hit that when he was at the GameCube. But
I was so cool.
So cool, right?
So
cool.
yeah. He's so cool.
I can't wait till I become cool one day.
What do you want to be when you grow up? I have no idea. There's something to that, too, with this console where I had a very specific set of friends I always hung out with. We were all the awkward, not cool kids. This generation was the awkward, pretty cool, but generation of consoles. You know, like, there's something about that where it's sort of meshed with your timing of your life at that. And it's just, and Matt, I think you mentioned it earlier, this was life. Like, these types of games, these types of experiences were life. Yeah, you went to school, but school was just in the way of your N64.
I mean, also, you guys made a great point on your Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2 episode with friend of the show, Eric Guess of the Unlockables. I think it was maybe Jiggy who brought it up, but one of you brought up that this was the first time we saw Pokemon in 3D, basically. Yeah. This and Pokemon Snap. And like that, those kinds of moments, I think, are also what carry this console, is that we've never seen the Pokemon in 3D. Oh my God, these look so cool, or truly terrible. But like
both.
I think the 3D design in Mario 64 for the Goombas is terrible. They have what I call paper face because they are beautifully rendered in 3D, except for their face, which looks like it was papered on. Whereas like the Koopa Troopas like are bigger and have fully modeled faces, everything. But it was all amazing to us because it just didn't exist before. We'd never seen anything like it. And I think also probably something that adds to, like, for me, Conker, for you, Jiggy, for Banjo, I think original characters that look that good and that cool. Yeah. Like, there was no imagining that Banjo was a bear. He looked like a bear, like a cartoon bear, but he looked like a bear. Like, we could really see in these games things that sprites could also convey, but just not quite in the same way. And everything, like, we were obsessed with 3D back then, 3D glasses, whatever, 3D design. And I think that having all of these first in that awkward era set a tone for a lot of folks as like, this is the future of games, and why I think it's getting a resurgence now where there are modern games coming out with PS1 and N64 aesthetics, because we're nostalgic for that design, because now it's a design choice. Then it was the peak of design. Now it's a design choice. And I think it's really fun because you can't quite always point to anything. Like, I don't know how we're going to do that for now, right?
Right.
I don't think there's going to be because with ultra realism, there's no design. It's real, which not to say it doesn't take work to design that, but it's based on reality or how real people look using facial capture. But like to go back and make sprite-based games, to make an indie game that has polygons, you're making a design choice and creating an aesthetic that doesn't exist instead of basing something on reality. And not one isn't more creative than the other. It's just interesting that now things that we thought were the peak of design are now an aesthetic and an era that we're seeing come back and continue to come back more and more as people who were our age grow up to then make games.
I think what we'll get as far as like, of the now is going to be design philosophy, not necessarily aesthetics, because there again, you're chasing a razor's edge of graphics. And as it reaches a point where we're not getting the big payoffs anymore, it will become the thing of there's trends that are happening now that are going to be like, I'm going to give them that 2024 energy kind of thing that we're going to look back and go, shit, you're right.
Damn.
So you brought up ukulele previously. What I was saying was about the 2D comment, about how you guys favored the 2D era, right?
We get it. We're
because
old. We get it. Okay.
No. I was a kid. I like 3D is what I grew up on.
Yeah.
You know, I always had 3D. So I never had this 3D was the future kind of vibe about it.
Right.
2D was something I looked back at and I was like, oh, that's neat. I played Super Metroid, I played Donkey Kong Country 2, played like Sonic, as I said. But a 3D, I was so immersed in it. That was the standard. So when I would go back and play something like my Game Boy Color, I'd be like, why does it look so bad? But what I was wondering is, do you guys have that level of nostalgia for the aesthetic of the 64 and PS1? Because I feel, and I could be totally wrong on this, I feel like the people that are focusing on that aesthetic are people my age that really were immersed in that. Like that was peak for them. That was their high point of nostalgia, kind of the formative years, like 6 to 10. Ukulele specifically did not focus on the N64 aesthetic.
Right.
They tried to recapture that feeling of banjo, and I feel that team that worked on ukulele didn't understand what made banjo. They had elements, and they're like, oh, we're going to make it look like this. We're going to make it do this. We're going to make it do this. But it was missing the meat and potatoes of what made banjo.
Yeah.
Which at its core was really good level design. There is something to be said about the aesthetic, because the N64 low poly mode that you can actually enable through one of the tonics in the game, super cool.
Yeah.
They ruin it by throwing a cheesy CRT filter over it with like rounded out edges. But the idea is there, and it gives the game an entirely different feel.
Yeah.
I'm super excited that they're giving it another go.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not, I was like, why are you remaking this game that's like 5 years old? But I'm excited to see and hope that maybe it captures those elements a little bit more. I've talked to some of that team and been like, okay, like here's my list of things. And they're like, we've addressed like all of those. I'm like, okay, that makes me super excited.
Yeah.
So.
Well, totally. I mean, like, it's funny. Shovel Knight gets a cameo in Ukulele, and for years it's been rumored around Yacht Club working on a Shovel Knight 64, right? Because it felt like the next evolution, and we don't know if that's coming. They're tight-lipped about it, of course, as they are. We know they're remastering the original Shovel Knight. They're working on Mina, but like, I would love a Shovel Knight 64 from someone like Yacht Club, because Yacht Club gets that. Yacht Club didn't make Shovel Knight play like it did then. They did a thing that Geoff and I always quote on the show. It plays how you remember it feeling.
Yeah.
And that kind of cognitive nostalgia that's not real nostalgia, it's evoking it, is the kind of thing I want from that stuff. It's why games that look polygonal but have modern controls, I tend to enjoy more than games that have tank controls and are polygonal, because I'm like, well, I don't really want the tank controls aren't the best part of that. You know?
No, there is a charm to the graphic style, and I do have nostalgia for those, because I jumped from the NES to the PS1 in my home. Like, I played Sega Genesis, I played SNES, but like what I was immersed in was that early jank of Polygon. Yeah, Matt, you hit the nail on the head too, with a lot of the ones nowadays that are doing that. They still have modern design philosophy in how they make their games. They can be collectathons, but they don't have to be those collectathons. They can be survival horror games, but they don't need tank controls. So they're not limited by the hardware in the same way. We were talking about how the N64 was definitely fertile grounds of playground rumors. Games with that nostalgic design idea, but being able to do more with less. You actually get into this thing of like, not just a place how you remember, they play like how you dreamed of. You can get the sort of weird little secrets, those things of, oh, there's a hidden relationship value. Like, why would they track that? Someone's tracking it now. It's not even a crazy thing amongst the several other cogs they've got spinning that I always imagined was happening.
I mean, that's a great example, Geoff, and actually reminds me of, there's a game on Steam called Shipwrecked 64. It's a haunted N64 game, basically. It's about a dev team that, like, something happened when they were developing a game and never released. Now it's released. Also, I think Crow 64 or something like that also on Steam. These are games where they're using that aesthetic and that weird playground talk and those weird glitches that these games would get, and using it as a horror bent.
Catastrophe Crow.
Catastrophe Crow.
If you go to the itch page, the controller setup is an N64 controller that then tells you how to control it with your keyboard.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Amazing.
It's when you use it in an interesting way. It's why Signalis spoke to me as a fan of the PS1. They're using the aesthetic to an effect to then do also something else. It's not just that for that sake. And I think to answer your question, Jiggy, about the nostalgia, I think for me, because Mario was such a formative character for me, because that experience is so closely tied to my dad, who I recently lost, and a life event that's important to me, I will always have nostalgia for that time because it's just so crystalline perfect. My memory is shit. I can't remember anything. Like, I'll play a game to come on a podcast to talk about 2 days before and still can't remember shit. But I think there's something to those memories that are so crystal that then makes the importance of something even more important.
How do you feel about Mario Odyssey?
So it's funny. We talked about the modernizing of things. Mario Galaxy didn't modernize anything. Neither did Mario Sunshine. They weren't trying to. They were trying to do something different. But when I played Mario Odyssey for the first time, I went, this is the sequel to Mario 64.
Yes.
Because it
I
plays,
agree.
Because it plays exactly like how I remember Mario 64 playing.
Yeah. And it just lets you collect everything in one go.
It's smooth. The friction. I loved it so much.
Great. I love it.
And that's the other thing. I love also when indie design, modern game design looks back on these sort of awkward phases and go, you know what? There is so much good here.
Yeah.
Do we need to go back and play it? Maybe. Historically, I like to think of myself as an ersatz librarian, so yeah, cool, fine. However, there is still beauty to be pulled from it. Like, if somebody wanted to, like, go, give me the pitch of, hey, do you want to play Quest 64 but good? I would be on that so quickly.
Careful there. We're friends with Quest 64 official. Don't want him coming for us.
Mike can take it.
Well, that's the thing. Is it a bad game? Yes. Is it a good game? Yes. Is it the most game of all time? Absolutely. Was it the best RPG that the N64 had until Paper Mario? Yes.
Paper Mario is so good.
Damned by faint praise, but yes.
And it's funny, like, that's also a thing that I think, before we start to wrap up, that the N64 had that I feel like no other console had. Games that, because there were so few of certain genres on it, were the best by default. Like, Perfect Dark is probably the best first-person shooter. You could argue Doom 64 or Perfect Dark are the best first-person shooters on that console.
You could argue South Park, but I'd get very mad at you.
Yes.
You should not argue
wrong.
that. No.
Yes.
You could. You shouldn't,
Right.
though.
But it's a console that has clear winners in categories because there was just not a huge library. Like, it's funny, I went back and played Crystal Shards recently, Kirby 64. And, like, I was a big Kirby fan, loved him since the NES, and went back and played the Game Boy games and then was a fan since.
Oh, yeah.
And so I looked forward to that game. And then when I played it, I remember being kind of disappointed because it was really different from other Kirby games. The combination mechanic, other things. I think I rented it. I don't know that I owned it as a kid, but when I went back and played it on the NSO, I went, this is a fun game.
Yeah.
What was my problem?
It's essentially a 2D game. Like, it's a 2D game.
And again,
It's fun.
You know what
I like
also
that game.
holds up? Yoshi's Story.
Oh,
Yeah, I wonder if we've played that recently on the chassis.
Hey. And those are so funny to look at because there again, I do want to briefly touch on once more sort of the culture divide between the two warring systems. Where the 16-bit generation, we had Sega does what Nintendo don't. We had blast processing. We had attitude.
Sonic was cool.
Sonic was so cool.
So cool.
Could you see a fat Italian plumber do the cool stuff that Sonic does? No. Yeah, buy the 32X. But the PlayStation gave us even more of that. It gave us You Are Not Ready. I think I remember seeing something where they were like, our target audience is a 19-year-old MTV watcher.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. N64 still had censorship to it that still existed in previous Nintendo consoles, but became more pronounced as other aspects of gaming reached their edgy part of the awkward phase. PS1 was allowed to be the edgelord with the blood code, essentially, and N64 got cutesier even, which is also why Conker's Bad Fur Day is such like a landmark title for it. They were like, no, we're going to be fighting this for several console generations. No, we can swear. We can make sex and poop jokes, guys, kind of thing. You know, despite that seemingly similar, like, attitude difference, the culture divide of those were all the greater, and it's so wild.
I could tell you, I was an N64 My cousin was a hardcore PS1,
Mm-hmm.
and he would tell me my console was like the baby console.
Baby console.
Yeah.
Sure.
He didn't like Zelda. He didn't really care about Mario. He was okay with Mario, but he had Final Fantasy VII and Resident Evil.
There's Twisted Metal, and then there's Hot Wheels.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
He's 3 weeks older than me, by the way.
Right.
Yeah. Perfect. I mean, also,
Love it.
to N64's credit, I have watched videos, read all sorts of things about how they managed to fit Resident Evil 2 on that
Oh, it's
cart.
insane.
And
So cool.
still, I'm just like,
Wizardry.
this is black magic.
It works.
This is so
it totally
cool.
works.
It's
It's so
wizardry.
crazy how
This
it
is
works.
pod racing.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
And you look at Yoshi's story when it came out, you started up.
Great
Like,
song.
Oh,
no, I have no leg to stand on this not being a baby show.
Yeah.
But it's a good game. It holds up.
It looks
but
great.
damn it, I love Rugrats.
Right.
Rugrats.
And that's the other thing, too. Like, your nostalgia is your nostalgia, and the window dressing is the window dressing,
Yeah.
but it's what gets you in sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who's to say what holds up? I will still play Yoshi's Story. I'm not going to play Wild 9.
That's a very good point. Before we wrap up and pick our favorite games, if you're looking for our accessory thing, the only thing I'll say about the N64 and its accessories is that I want to go back to a time where we have consoles and controllers designed like the N64. The clear plastic nonsense, the colors, the different consoles, like the see-through
Fantastic.
stuff. I want atomic purple everything. Like,
Yes.
it's just a bygone era. It doesn't exist. And as far as peripherals, there was the Rumble Pack, there was the expansion pack, and there was the transfer pack. And a microphone for Hey You Pikachu, which almost never worked.
Apparently, I was looking this up about the 64 DD and how they had over 60 canceled games and they got like kicked across consoles or just straight up canceled. One of them was Seaman, the Dreamcast game.
Oh, was
Yeah,
that one of
yeah,
them?
yeah.
That
meant
was
for the
one of them,
microphone.
apparently.
Yeah.
I don't know if we would have had Leonard Nimoy on it if it was the N64 DD. So you know what? This timeline's got some good stuff in it. I guess we could stick around. And so yeah, it had a mouse and a microphone as well. But like everything else was like you'd put it into the controller port. It was very cool.
Yeah, the one
was very
thing I will
cool.
say is that the transfer pack I had, and I would say that the best utilization of it for me was because it's games that I absolutely love is the Mario Golf games.
Yes.
Ooh, yeah.
Yes.
I forgot it did anything besides Pokemon.
Yeah, and Pokemon, I mean, we talked about this in the Pokemon Stadium episode, which was out recently. It's not the same game unless you use your own Pokemon. It's really not all that good. It's fine.
You want to rent a level 100 Mewtwo that knows Tail
Yeah.
Whip and Quick Attack?
right?
Yeah.
You mean at level 100 it doesn't finally do damage? Oh, no. My 10-year-old self is so wrong.
The Mario Golf stuff I loved. I had and still have the Game Boy cartridges for Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance, and I would play it on Game Boy, and I would take it home, and I would put it on the 64, and it was great. I loved that part of it.
So cool.
Yeah, it was so cool. To me, that's what the transfer pack was the Game Boy Color game, like specifically, and that's all I needed as a youngin. That's all I needed, and I loved it, and I loved those games.
Did you all have controller packs?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I had to.
I have to.
Well,
Yeah,
eventually I did.
eventually.
But
Eventually.
for a while I was running without one. I
Oh, for
remember
sure.
games that I loved. Rayman 2,
Mm-hmm.
that one specifically. I would just leave my console running.
What did we just play, Jiggy? We were talking about this maybe on Paperboy, which as of the release of this episode would be like just a few days prior or whatever.
Mhm.
Needed so much space to save on it
Yeah.
that I was like,
Yeah,
no.
I can't remember.
There's some joke about needing pages in Paperboy.
Something.
But that's,
Yes, it's just it was
Yeah,
like this
right.
game is not that robust. Like I don't know if it was Paperboy specifically. It was so random how much space things needed to take up. It was like this is obviously a PlayStation issue as well at the time, but
Right.
and continued to be, but it's just wild how that like what were blocks? What were pages? Like
Yeah.
what does that even mean?
The blocks were a delineation of 1 megabit, so they were approximate. I looked this up a while ago. I've got
I'm
it
sure
written
as
down
kids we
somewhere,
all knew
but
that
yeah.
as well. Yeah.
No, yeah, as kids, I totally knew this. Well, I was also looking up stuff about the saving protocol for the N64
Right.
because some things saved to cart, some things you needed the controller pack memory card to it,
Mhm.
and everything else. And the weird spread of things that are volatile versus non-volatile memory.
Mhm.
I have so many PS1 memory cards. They're pretty stable. I've got to replace watch batteries in my controller pack if I want to keep playing Castlevania 64.
Yeah.
I have to say, because I think Nintendo is responsible for a lot of revolution in video games. That's not hyperbole, it's just
Yeah.
true. But I think the clearest delineation of modern gaming that they are responsible for, full stop, hands down, is the Rumble Pack and vibration and controllers. It is now ubiquitous and standard in everything. To a fault, I'd say sometimes. Like, I don't mind when my controller rumbles, but I actually have the Hori controllers for the Switch that don't have rumble in it. I'm like, I actually like this better. I just like playing the game. But the Rumble Pack started something. And I remember playing the Rumble Pack with Star Fox for the first time. I was like, it's like I'm in the cockpit.
We crashed so much just to feel something.
Just to feel something.
Still do.
There's no straighter line to ubiquity in modern gaming as the Rumble Pack to all controllers now. All controllers have Rumble, full stop. All games support Rumble, basically, full stop. And I think that's kind of astonishing because there are other things that I think Nintendo did, but other people did around the same time. Like, you could say the same thing for the Wii and the motion control, which then would be force-fed into other stuff. But those weren't successful. Rumble is successful. It's everywhere. But Nintendo started that. And that kind of blows my mind when I think about it.
Yeah, it seems so simple because it's like, just put a little, spinning whatever it is that they used inside, and then they went all out in this at this exact same time, and they put mini Rumble Packs in a couple of Game Boy Color games as well, and it's like, what? Like, Pokemon Pinball is awesome, partially because it has a Rumble Pack and it's in your hand. Like, to me, that's better than even Star Fox. It's like, it's a pinball machine. This is crazy. You're right. It's everywhere, and it seems so simple, but it really added something to the experience at that time, because even going and putting your hand on the arcade, for example, in the 90s, that experience was different because of the way you were playing it, but somehow the immersion that we get now from games is not the same of what we could get then because of technology and whatever, and just how things look and how they played, but somehow that little extra bzz mattered. It made a difference.
Listen, HD Rumble. I love the evolution of Rumble.
It's cool.
I never thought it would matter, but I'm playing a game like Astrobot, right?
Oh, yeah.
Great platformer,
Totally.
but just the feeling how it somehow, whether it's the combination of the sound coming out of the speaker and the haptic feedback, it somehow creates texture.
Yeah. When it's at its best.
That's perfect texture.
Wizardry.
Yeah.
I
Literal magic.
But every time I'm like running on grass and then running on metal and I can feel the difference, it adds something to it and makes it way more immersive. There's a few moments on Switch because the Switch has the HD Rumble. I know 1-2 Switch was gimmicky, but had some really cool things like how many marbles are in your controller. And you're like rolling it around. That's really neat. But even things like Breath of the Wild, I remember there's like doors that would lift up. They would rise and you could feel it like moving up. Yeah. Weird.
It's so.
I love that stuff.
Yeah.
Let's keep evolving it further. Let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep the momentum going.
Yeah. And so my caveat we're obviously all going to say our favorite games. I think we have to eliminate Mario 64, if nothing else, because it defined a generation of 3D platformers. And at least for me, then it'll give me an excuse to talk about 2 other games instead of 1 other game. But my caveat is, I want you to share your favorite game, as we always do for the console, and then share your favorite little-known game. Now, there are a few games these days with the internet that aren't known at all, but I can promise that all 4 of us will have a different little-known game, except for me, because it's become my brand. For me, the one I'm throwing out as an example is Clay Fighter 63 1/3. A fun fighting game, weird graphics, had Booger Man in it, Earthworm Jim in it, like... We haven't even talked about the bottom of the barrel games like Earthworm Jim 64, which I was excited for and was a total nightmare. South Park.
Superman. Jeff mentioned Superman a while ago.
Yes.
Oh yeah, no, that was. You have to mention it. You like if you don't, it's like putting a penny in the will so people know you are being forgotten.
Yeah. But like even StarCraft 64, which I loved StarCraft, but was such a piss poor port of that. But for me, like my favorite game on the console, I think it has to be Mystical Ninja Goemon is one of my favorite games on that console.
Interesting, okay.
Because not only is it unlike every other Goemon game, but like it was basically a Zelda game where you got a mech.
Yeah.
And that just makes it better than Zelda to me.
Kind of, yeah.
It's easily one of my favorite, like that's my favorite, like not a lot of people talk about this game, unless you're Jerry from SuperPod, because he loves the Goemon series more than anyone I know. But for me, that's my little-known game that I think is one of the best N64 games in a franchise that had some good games, but for like that one was peak, and we have never really gotten anything like it. My well-known game, because it's a meme at this point, and my absolute favorite game on this console next to Mario 64 is Buck Bumble.
Yeah.
Not only because it's got an incredible title screen theme, which it does. Full stop, one of the best ever made. Every time I play it for someone, they're like, holy shit.
It's amazing.
It goes hard.
It goes so hard. But the game is a lot of fun. And for like a console that had a lot of air combat games and a variety of air combat games, this is still so different. And when I recommended it to go on Remember 64, when I did, part of it was a bit. Like, I love that title screen music. And so it was a little bit a bit. But then when I replayed it, I went, oh no, this game is actually still really good. Yeah. And Argonaut Studios is back. So, who knows?
Hey, let's go.
Right?
I mean, we're getting Gex. We're getting Glover.
Yeah,
which are games that I never played, just like a lot of the mascot platformers I said I missed in the PlayStation and PlayStation 2 era. Never played Glover, never played the Gex games. Hopefully, I'll get to those soon. But I think Buck Bumble is just such an underrated game and one of my favorites on the console because not only does it have a great soundtrack and the best title theme music probably ever, but like it still controls pretty well, especially on an N64 controller.
It does.
Which was the key, I think, to a lot. Like, I have still not bought the N64 controller for the Switch, but I'm really close to buying it because playing all of those games require that controller.
Get that Trident. Yes.
I don't think there's any other console that had a controller so unique that it is required to still play those games. The facsimile of Mario Galaxy on the Switch works because you have the Joy-Cons, and it's pretty close. It's not perfect. But Mario 64 just doesn't work the way it's mapped. It's just not the same.
Yeah.
But to me, nothing stands up to Buck Bumble as far as like a weird-ass game that wasn't a franchise that I absolutely love. Like Mario 64 is my pinnacle. It's one of my top 10 games of all time. But there's something about Buck Bumble that just feels truly special to me on that console. And so I have to shout it out as my favorite game. Geoff, do you have two games for this stipulation I came up with?
I think so. I mean, I do love Pokemon Snap. There's things that new Pokemon Snap didn't do that the old one did that I miss. I loved getting to play around with that. I didn't get to spend enough time with Mischief Makers to call that my obscure pick, but it's fantastic. And I love that Double Shake is coming out soon, which draws inspiration also from stuff like Klonoa and Tomba. But Mischief Makers is... Like, I played it at a limited run event not that long ago, and once I realized, oh, it's Shake, I was like, I keyed in and then had a great time. So you know what? Screw it. Mischief Makers is my choice there. But I promised a redeeming story for Sarah.
Yes.
Here it is.
Yes.
My favorite game for the Nintendo 64 is Paper Mario, period, end of sentence.
Yeah.
I'm a big RPG fan. I love irreverent humor. And you don't have to go gross or crazy. You can, and it's still fun. But Paper Mario had such fun with itself. Playing through it, again, no nostalgia. I played this a good amount of years ago because I'm old and I've been married for over a decade. So there's that. Now, Sarah and I, given that I was a PS1 kid and she was an N64 kid, we had the opportunity to, and of course, we played games from other consoles. This wasn't, the Cold War. But the nostalgia... you share with each other.
Yeah.
So I've had the unique pleasure of introducing Sarah to a lot of my old favorite games, the Final Fantasy series in general. She thought she didn't like RPGs for the longest time, but she didn't really think of Paper Mario as one. But she loved that game. And it's like, we're sitting down and we're playing it. Now, most of the time when we do RPGs, as Sarah, from her own mouth, said, she's holding the controller. I'm on guidebook, I'm whatever. But she wanted me to play this game. So... we found a compromise where we both played it. Adorable, stupid, sappy thing of sitting next to each other, arms around each other. I'm holding the A and B buttons, and she's holding the controller stick.
Amazing.
And so we figured out how to do 90% of the platforming that way. Like, that is
Impressive.
teamwork.
That's damn good.
That's fucking teamwork. And that got us playing Thousand Year Door and everything else. And so... the Paper Mario series is still one of her favorites, and that time playing Paper Mario on N64 that is my nostalgia for the Nintendo 64. And it is still a great game. It's still a lot of fun, and I now think I'm due for a replay.
It's fantastic. It's so good.
That's I love that.
It's so fun.
That
It
is
is
great.
an excellent game. Not
It
my
also made
favorite
me
in
feel
the
really
series.
bad getting a really nice healing item from Wacka.
You know what? It makes so much sense though that your favorite game on the console is one of the 2 RPGs.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
It makes
absolutely.
you're like, I'm a PS1 person.
Oh, I'm that bitch. Like, look, all of my other favorite N64 games are typically shooters. Like, I loved Rogue Squadron. I love Star Fox 64, like any of those. But yeah, no.
The RPG.
Red for Filth. You're right.
Makes sense. Nothing wrong with it. It's a great game.
Exactly.
RPGs are fun.
Yeah.
They are. And thankfully, Paper Mario came out. Otherwise, I'd look like a real idiot being like, yeah, I liked the N64 Mystic Quest wannabe.
What about you, Jiggy? Do you have a game for each of those categories?
Oh, absolutely. Banjo-Tooie, tip of the
Obviously,
top.
yeah.
There's nothing else
Yeah.
for me. I mean, DK64 is up there for me, but Banjo-Tooie, there's just something about it. What's interesting about that is I didn't have any friends that liked Banjo-Kazooie or Banjo-Tooie.
Interesting.
I didn't. That was my own thing. I found Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie and just fell in love with them. I played and played and played on my old cartridge, which unfortunately I don't have anymore, but I do have a new cartridge. I mean, my playtime probably was in the hundreds of hours of just exploring this world because I was just enamored. I just loved it. I loved the characters. I would stop and swap. There was that mythical playground thing
Yeah.
like we talked about.
Absolutely, yeah.
What if there was something else? You know, what if there was more? What if I missed something in the game? What if I didn't get 100% like I thought or it told me? What if there was something else? And I would always keep looking. DK64 might have done that to me too, because you could get above 100%. So I feel like that opened this window with games where I was like,
But is it done?
is it done?
Is it though?
Is it really?
Is it?
Is it? But yeah, the world, the characters, everything to this day. Recently replayed Banjo-Tooie on NSO. Still love it. Still love it. Everything about it.
Again, you know, Sarah being kind of my conduit to N64, I've never played Banjo-Tooie because one day, many years ago, she and another friend of ours spent an entire day 100%ing Banjo-Tooie.
Nice.
Fantastic.
And I think they made an unspoken pact to never touch the game again.
I could see it.
wow.
I could see it.
A mix of a perfect experience and I can't go back.
Yeah.
oh,
It
it's so great,
inspires
though.
that kind of feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. If I had to pick a more obscure game, there were 2 games that kind of came to mind. One, I was proud because I got Dave to play it by peer pressuring him while he was streaming, which was great. I was Robotron 64.
Yeah.
I was like, you just need to play it. And he's like, what is this? And ironically, though, because we were playing Paperboy at the time, that was what his stream was focused on. But you swapped over, and I noticed that the dude in Robotron 64 looks an awful lot like the mad scientist in Paperboy, and they were made by the same company. Yeah. I'm like, is there a connection? But that's just me.
Saving assets.
Right?
Hey.
Another game, though, it popped into my head when you said that. Did anyone ever play Star Soldier Vanishing Earth?
No.
I played Star Soldier on the NES. I didn't know it had an N64 release.
It's so good. It was so much fun. It is more obscure, and I think that just proved it. Fun, flashy graphics, ship shooter going really quick, get really stupid, obnoxiously big lasers and blasting. I mean, it's just so much fun. Dave, you'd love it.
Yeah, you know what? The title
didn't.
the title didn't stand out to me, but I think I may have rented this when I was younger, but I as far as having any extensive experience, very, very little. But
Oh, this looks good.
this does look good.
It's so
Jiggy,
much
cue it
fun.
up.
You
Put it on
should
the
give
list.
it a
Let's
shot.
go, buddy.
I highly recommend it. Highly recommend
Please, let's
it.
go.
Oh
Let's
my
do this. We have
God.
to play this.
I mean, now you guys just got to bring Geoff on to play this.
Honestly.
game, right?
Oh my
All
God.
right, Geoff, let's
Jeff,
do
it's
it.
happening.
Let's do this.
Whether you like it or not, it's happening.
Do you know how bad I am at Ikaruga despite how much I've played Ikaruga? This is going to be good.
Oh, I have those types of games too. Same here. There's lots of those.
I am not good at shoot 'em ups. I love them,
Yes.
though.
Yes. There we go. That's me in RPGs.
That's what it's all about.
Let's see. What do I have? So towards the beginning where I was like, well, my experience with the N64 growing up was all the typical titles. Pretty much all of them. And I mean like almost exclusively. So at the time, I would say my obscure title which is not even obscure at all because it's already been mentioned multiple times, would have been Diddy Kong Racing at the time because everyone wanted Mario Kart 64. But I just was like, no. Diddy Kong's the shit.
Absolutely.
I'm playing it on my own. It's single player. It's everything we've said before. So at the time it was that. Now one of the ones that, and it's not a great game, but it's cool and has a lot of very interesting small ideas that I've never seen this done before in a game like this. And people are gonna think I'm crazy, but Mission Impossible is actually kind of good.
Nope.
No, that's
it.
a good pick.
It's great.
That's
Great.
a good one, actually. Yeah.
I know it exists. I've never played it. See, there we go.
Yeah.
Proving the point.
It takes the GoldenEye gadgets to the next level.
Yes.
It's just
Yes.
And
Okay,
it's third
yeah.
person, which at this
Yeah.
point in my life, I prefer third person games than first person. Whatever. That's just now. But I remember renting this game because I loved that first movie. It was one of the first like adult movies I saw in the movie theater because it was kind of violent or whatever, right?
Real.
And it's not based on it or anything like that, but it was like, it's Mission Impossible. And then the second one came out a couple years after the game, and it was a whole thing, right? Replaying it for Remember 64 or playing it in full, in entirety, a couple years ago at this point, I was like, wow, I like what they're doing here. Is it fantastic? Does it play amazing? Does it even look that good? Nah, whatever, awkward.
Asking the wrong questions.
Asking the wrong questions, exactly.
Yeah.
But then it has like small ideas where like at the end of the game, I can't remember exactly how you get to it. Instead of like rolling credits, you walk around one of the levels where you're undercover as a waiter. Instead, you're not undercover. You're just walking around as Ethan Hunt, and you're talking to each of the people that made the game at like a fancy dinner party, and they tell funny jokes and make fun of each other, of the other developers and stuff. And they have like their t-shirts with the developer's logo on it. Like, little stupid things like that where like this is completely unnecessary, but it's personality and it's fun in a game that isn't really based around that. Anyways, Mission Impossible is great.
I went on record at PAX West this past year with my hot take saying that gaming lost something when we stopped doing big head mode.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that exactly is why I said
Yeah.
it. That level of, I don't know, joy, whimsy.
Weird. That level
Weird.
of weird fun. Yeah, exactly. And as far as like my favorite game on the console, there's a lot that I mentioned No Mercy. It could be that. I think to me, maybe the best game in my opinion, that is the one that I would go back to at any point, and maybe because it's not very long, would be Star Fox. But I think that my favorite is probably Banjo-Kazooie. Like I do think that that's my favorite. And now sitting here with my son, who is now just under 9 months old, it is the first game that I played, quote unquote, with him. At the time, he was having a very hard time sleeping.
He was present.
He was present for the entirety of me playing through that game. He slept on me for the entire 11 hours that I played through Banjo-Kazooie. So it's got an extra bonus point just because of that. Whether he knows it or not, Banjo-Kazooie is the first game that he completed from start to finish. So
His first words are going to be "Ikum Bokum."
I hope so. I hope so.
Go.
Oh, he does a lot of go
Like-
already. Don't worry.
There you go. Well, and honestly, like the way that the game is set up, how scary or not scary it gets. Like, look, I grew up watching Don Bluth movies, so it's same kind of feel. That's good formative. I like that.
Yeah.
That's
And it's
amazing.
I've always I've gone back to that game so many times. Maybe not played it through its entirety. And this time I was actually trying to 100% it. And I think I said this to Jiggy not that long ago. This particular playthrough, I was missing less than 10 notes in the entire game, all from memory. I grabbed everything in the game, and I think it was like 6 or 5, and I have no idea where they were. And I was just not. I
Click,
just
clack,
couldn't.
wood?
I couldn't find them. I tried for like an extra like 90 minutes, and I was like, I got to move on, unfortunately. But the 97 or 96% completion was great. So I'm happy that I
Just
did
good
it.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Better
When
than
I go
most.
back and play a Metroid game, I'm not 100%ing that. You're
Yeah,
goddamn
yeah.
right.
You mentioned
Yeah.
Metroid. Metroid is one of the only first-party franchises not on this console. What they would have done with it, I don't necessarily know, because what they did with GameCube, I totally get it, and it's great.
Right.
But it would have been cool. I think they would have had some
It would
sort
have
of
been cool.
aesthetic in this style that could have really worked.
That would have been a third-party title,
Oh.
the same way that Metroid Prime kind of
Right.
was. And I think from my own surface-level research, everyone was like, no, Super Metroid's too good. How could we follow it up? No, don't, oh, no,
Yeah.
no.
Oh yeah,
The-
I'm sure.
Like,
Yeah.
whether that is true or not, it feels like it could have been true. I would, well, and again, there's been a lot of fun throwback stuff, whether people, like we were talking about before, going back to the old aesthetics to do a new thing, or the fact that people are still making games for older consoles. And I know that there have been N64 games that have been made after 2001. So I would love to see what the fan Metroid or the I can't believe it's not Metroid 64, because the cease and desist on that would probably be so fast.
So worth it, though. So worth it.
Can we take 2 seconds to just talk about how there's this mod scene
Yes.
and fan creations, recreations? I mean, we had the guy from Smash Remix on Remember 64. Super cool to just, that project is just a beast. But other things, like I did a video on Dinosaur Planet.
Yeah.
Oh, right, yeah.
The original Star Fox Adventures before it was Star Fox Adventures. Super cool that community is like rebuilding this game, and it's incredible. I love that I live in this time where this is happening, and it's almost giving me like these games that I heard about as a kid that I never, I never got to see to completion. It's bringing that back, and I'm getting these moments of classic Rare when Rare was at their best.
Yeah.
This is a game from that I never got to experience, and I love it experiencing it. I'm like, this is Rare. This is what I love. It's different, but it's still there. I feel that charm.
Yeah.
We're rolling nostalgia forward and making playground rumors come true.
Basically.
The dream.
And quickly before we wrap up, the Metroid thing, I remember being one of the only of my friends going, "No, it's Samus from Metroid." What game?
Yeah.
Because in
Smash
Smash
Bros.
Brothers,
Yeah.
in Smash Brothers, I always played Samus. Samus and Kirby were my favorites in that one.
Me too.
And everyone's like, "Who the F is Samus? Kind of looks like Master Chief." It's not Master Chief.
Master Chief.
Not-
Oh.
I fought that fight for a long time, but now everyone knows who Samus is.
Damn right.
Thank you both so much for joining me. I couldn't have imagined a better duo to have talk about the N64. Before we get into wrapping up our show and pitching our nonsense, starting with Jiggy and then Dave, please talk about what you do online, pitch the podcast, pitch YouTube, pitch it all. Tell folks where they can find you.
Well, I make a lot of content on YouTube, and it is under Jiggylookback, all one word. That's a Banjo-Tooie reference inside of a name. It's fantastic. I make a lot of content on Rare games specifically, a lot of N64 titles. I've expanded out a little bit. I've done some GameCube titles. I'm just starting now to cover PS1, so I'm not trying to like fit myself into one niche, but I do have a heart for the N64, and obviously Donkey Kong 64 is where I connected with Dave.
Mm-hmm.
He just brought me on, and I just ranted about DK64, and then after that, he's like, "You want to come on again?" I was like, "Sure." "You want to come on again?"
Sure.
"Sure." "You want to be my co-host?"
Yeah,
"Sure."
2 years later. Sure.
2 years later, yeah. It's been a blast. Love talking about the N64 on Remember 64. It just expand upon it a little bit more on my channel. It's this cool, like, combined of forces. I absolutely love it. On my channel specifically, I tend to dive more into, like, mysteries are my thing. I just find, like, little lore bits, theories. It's like, what about that milk in Zelda? What about Lon Lon milk? Why does that heal you from any injury? Does that make sense? Why does that happen? What makes that milk special? It just gives me an outlet to be super creative and explore lore in games that I played and give them a little bit more life, you know? That's the goal.
Very nice.
It's a great channel.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I've been a fan since I met Jiggy, and like the mysteries videos, but specifically your Dinosaur Planet stuff has been really great because the energy you just felt from Jiggy now is sincere in the best way because the video is the same. It's just this excitement to explore this thing that was thought to be lost to time. So I definitely recommend that video. Definitely recommend any of the mystery videos. They're equal parts ridiculous, funny, and
Yes,
interesting.
exactly.
Like, and it's just, they're great.
And super
So
well
definitely go
produced
check that
from
stuff.
someone who
Yes.
does video editing and audio editing even at work and for fun. Super well done and takes a lot of skill to do that. So that's another added.
Oh,
I don't even
thanks.
no. I'm dead serious because I mean you need the time to do it, but also you need the skill to do it, and I don't have either of those. So it's great to watch. And then for me, Remember 64 is the easiest place to find me. Remember 64 show right across the board. I'd say on social media, but pretty much a little bit on Instagram and pretty much Blue Sky right now, and that's pretty much it. And then on YouTube as well, where I post all the video versions of the episodes. Every once in a while, some added stuff that I come up with, little silly shorts that are just for a joke. Live streams and stuff also happen on YouTube at very random times because life gets in the way, and it is what it is. But remember 64, as you may have heard previously, is going through every game in the library, 200 and something. We'll see how many episodes you get to before the world crumbles around us. But we are playing the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between, which we have got a taste of at this point. I would say getting 60 something episodes in, we're at that point. There's a lot of big titles we've hit already, but there's a lot still to come. And the obscure ones, all the kind of really crazy stuff and interesting in between awkward titles are what really, I think, keep me going with something like this, because it's so cool to learn as you go. I thought I knew what this console was. I really did when I started it.
Mm-hmm.
And I quickly realized I knew nothing. And I love that.
The best thing about that N64, you never know when something's going to be a banger.
That's
You just don't.
exactly. I mean, Buck Bumble's a perfect example. It looked cool. I knew the box art, which is what I knew from a lot of, even Robotron. I know the box art. Did I ever play this game? Does it look like I might be interested? Sure. Did I ever play it? Not till now, and I love it. I really like going into things blind like that. It's a lot of fun. It's been great having a lot of different voices, Matt included. Geoff, it's happening. It's happening. Having Jiggy along the ride with me has been awesome too. So remember 64 right across the board. Find it where you get your podcasts, as they say.
It's a fun listen. It's great. And not just because I've been on it several times, and for a little behind the scenes, not going to say what yet, but Dave and I have already talked about my next appearance, and we picked a banger game.
Yep.
So
that's right.
I'm going to keep that streak going, hopefully.
Oh, you will. You will. Just by knowing what it is, you will. You will. That's on a hot streak. Just put it that way.
I haven't brought anything bad like Dave Jackson bringing South Park.
It had to happen. Someone had to do it.
Someone had to fall on that sword. Thank you, Dave Jackson, for doing
right.
that. Thank you again both for joining us. It's a genuine pleasure always to podcast with you, but for this felt like something special. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. It was a blast.
And now we put it to you, listener. What are your memories of the N64? How many of these games that we talked about were new to you? I mean, several of them were new to us, so even with only 296 domestic official releases, there's still plenty to find. What were those games that you looked at and went, I can't possibly, but they became new favorites? What were your multiplayer couch co-op memories? What's that game that you can't look at ever again because of what that one friend did? They know what they did. Let us know. Please reach out to us. There's so many great ways to get in touch. We are Fun and Games Pod across all social media that we are active on, which as of this episode is Blue Sky, Instagram, and Tumblr. We are funandgamespod@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of previous episodes, what you'd like us to talk about, and who you'd like us to talk with on future episodes. If you have an N64 collection and you got like those cool stickers that you could put on the top of the cart so you can read them like spines, please send me pictures. I keep going back and forth on if I want to get those, and I think they're so cool, and they keep being like the fourth thing on the list when I'm only getting 3 things. You know what I mean? But that's fine. That's fine. You can visit certainpov.com, where you'll find not only so many other fantastic Certain POV podcasts, but also a permanent invite link to our Discord server, where we talk about these games, we have these sort of discussions, and we share these sort of memories. If you want to find an additional way to support us and you have the financial or emotional means and want to do so, you can visit our Patreon, patreon.com/funandgamespod. There is also a free tier. Console retrospectives like this one are decided by poll that are done by people who are part of the Patreon. If you want to choose what our next console retrospective is going to be, you've got to be on the Patreon for that. It's also a fantastic one-stop shop of all the things Matt and I are working on. And we are so thankful and grateful for all of our patrons, and we'd like to shout out those on the high scoreboard. Today, the high scoreboard is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Nyden, Alejandro Alves, Chris Copleen, Curly Bright, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Robert Prine, Sean Bowen, and Wes Bates. Thank you so much for your support. Please enter your initials. It will be a 1-on-3. You will have to rotate the control stick, and I don't remember the last time we repaired that thing. It really is the weakest part of the Tonka construction that is the Nintendo 64. I'm sorry. You're gonna be fine. A star is on the line.
Of course, a free thing you can do that helps support this podcast is rate us and review us on your podcast platform of choice. places like Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Spotify, Pocket Casts. All of them have either star rating or a place to write a little review. It only takes a couple minutes, and it's really the best way to grow our audience. And so when folks look up the N64 in the search function on their podcast platform, we jump to the top. So please go and do that. We really, really appreciate it.
Whether you are rating and reviewing, part of the Patreon, somebody who has the craziest, hottest takes of the N64 that I really want to hear, or this is your first episode that you're listening to, thank you so much. We couldn't do this without you. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Do you find yourself playing older games and wishing that there were new discussions about those games? Enter Tales from the Backlog. Hi, I'm Dave Jackson, and on each episode, I'm joined by a guest to break down those games that may be stuck in your ever-expanding backlog. Each episode looks at one game in depth, focusing on mechanics, story, music, and other aspects with no spoilers until a clearly marked spoiler wall in the middle. If you've played the game, go ahead and climb that spoiler wall and enjoy in-depth story discussions, and if not, jump out when we warn you and maybe go play that game for yourself. We have over 100 episodes in the feed, everything from Disco Elysium to Tunic to discussion episodes about how to get into horror games, and if games actually need to be fun, or if they have more to offer. I guarantee that there's something in there for everybody. Once again, that's Tales from the Backlog, available wherever your podcasts are found.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.